I have to be honest with you today. I hit a wall this week, a pretty serious wall.
Oh, yeah. What kind of wall?
The kind where you're lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling at 3 in the morning.
Right. The classic 3 in the morning stare.
Exactly. Just convinced that you are, frankly, broken. And not just broken, but that the instructions for how to fix you are buried somewhere inside your own head. If you could just, dig deep enough.
The great archaeological dig of the self.
Yes. I'm lying there thinking, okay, if I just meditate harder, or if I journal for another 20 pages today, or if I finally find the right therapist who asks the magic question, I'm going to hit this solid gold core of truth.
Like a black box flight recorder.
Right. Something that explains exactly why I am the way I am.
It is the ultimate promise of the modern age, isn't it? This idea that you are a solvable puzzle.
It really is. And the flip side is, if you weren't solved yet, it's just because you're lazy. But here is where I got stuck. And what I really want to talk about in our deep dive today. What happens when you do the work? You dig, you peel back the layers, you sit in the silence, and you find absolutely nothing.
And we are not talking about a peaceful, enlightened Zen nothing.
No. A terrifying, empty nothing.
That is the exact tension we are exploring today. We're diving into a really challenging and honestly kind of haunting essay titled Unformed.
Written by Pedro Malha.
Yes.
And just to give everyone some context, Malha isn't your typical self-help guru. He is a philosopher, a writer, and he actually founded this nonprofit organization called the Ghosts Movement.
Which sounds incredibly spooky.
It does sound spooky, but it's actually this group dedicated to mapping the limits of human experience.
Right. And this essay, Unformed, it essentially takes a sledgehammer to that buried treasure model of psychology you just described. Malha argues that the reason you sometimes find nothing when you look inside isn't because you're bad at looking.
Right.
It's because there is literally nothing there to find.
Which, I'll be completely honest, when I first read that, it made me feel incredibly bleak. It sounded like just giving up, like saying, well, I guess I'm just empty inside.
It absolutely feels that way initially. But stick with us today, because Malha's argument is that recognizing this, understanding the unformed, is actually the only way to stop torturing yourself.
Okay, so before we get to the relief, because I definitely need the relief, we have to look at why we torture ourselves in the first place. Malha talks about what he calls the standard model of inner life.
Yeah. And everyone listening will know this well. It is the water we swim in.
For sure.
Whether you're looking at Freud or Jung or modern trauma therapy or even a lot of modern spirituality, the core belief is always the same. Depth is continuous.
Continuous depth. Meaning, if I go down, I eventually hit the bottom.
Meaning that the inner world is an infinite well. There are no gaps. If you have a feeling, it has a source. If you have a behavior, it has a root cause. Everything inside you is connected to a why.
It's the logic of cause and effect, but applied to the soul.
Exactly.
Like, if I'm anxious, there simply must be a reason. Maybe it's my childhood. Maybe it's my diet. Maybe it's the start of the economy. But there is something that caused this.
Precisely. And the direct corollary to that belief is this. If something feels unresolved, it is simply because you haven't found the link yet.
You just haven't dug deep enough.
You haven't done the work.
God, I really hate that phrase. Done the work.
A lot of people do. But here is the thing, and Malha is actually very fair about this. We believe this because it works most of the time.
Right. And I don't want to sit here and dismiss therapy or anything. I have had those aha moments myself. I realized last year I was snapping at my partner because I was actually stressed about a massive project at work. I found the link, it was buried, I dug it up, and I genuinely felt better.
Exactly. Introspection is often highly successful. You pay attention, you see a pattern, you find the underlying memory, and you integrate it. It is a very reliable mechanism.
So what's the problem then?
The problem is that because it works sometimes, we assume it must work always.
Yeah.
We create a universal rule based on partial data. We assume that the mind is 100% accessible.
I see. So when we hit a wall, we don't think, oh, this is a wall. We think, I am failing to find the door.
And that is exactly where the suffering starts. That is the glitch that Malha identifies. He catalogs these very specific moments where the machinery of introspection just completely breaks down.
Let's get into these glitches, actually, because this is where the essay got really visceral for me. He describes 3 specific counter experiences, and the first one is the static silence.
Oh, yes. This is the absolute bane of every meditator out there.
Tell me about it. I have been using one of those mindfulness apps for years, and they always have these prompts saying things like, watch your thoughts pass like clouds or wait for the insight to arise.
Right. They're training you to expect movement.
But sometimes you sit there and there are no clouds and there are no insights. It's just dead air.
And how does that usually feel when it happens?
It feels like I'm doing it wrong. I sit there and my inner monologue goes, why is my mind so blank? Am I repressed? Am I completely dissociated? I start panic searching for something, anything to feel.
That panic is the key. Malha points out that the silence isn't hiding anything. It is not a locked safe waiting for a combination. It is just an empty room. But because we cannot accept an empty room, we fill it with anxiety about our own competence.
We would rather believe we are broken than believe there is simply nothing there.
Exactly. But the second glitch he mentions is even more physical, I think. He calls it the weight.
Presence without reference. That specific phrase has been stuck in my head all week.
It is such a remarkably precise description.
Can we break down what that actually feels like? Because I think everyone listening has felt this at some point, but we rarely talk about it because it sounds a bit crazy.
It usually hits in the morning, right? You wake up, the sun is shining, you have a perfectly good job, your family is healthy, nothing is actively wrong, but your chest feels like it is completely full of lead.
Yes, it is this heavy gravitational pull, and immediately, like within seconds of opening my eyes, my brain goes into overdrive. I start flipping through the mental Rolodex. I think, okay, am I sad about that argument I had 3 years ago? No. Am I anxious about the presentation on Thursday? No. I'm actually really prepared for that.
You are frantically trying to attach a narrative to the physical sensation.
I'm trying to glue a label on it. I'm trying to find the reference for the presence.
But in this specific case, the Rolodex comes up totally empty. The weight is there. It is undeniable. It is deeply physical, but it has no story. It isn't actually about anything.
And that is terrifying, because if it is not about anything, how on earth do I fix it? I can't process a feeling that has no origin.
And that brings us right to the third glitch, which is the most subtle, but maybe the most haunting of all. The missing piece.
This is the feeling of absence that isn't loss.
Right. If you lose a loved one or a job, you feel a deep absence. But that absence has a defined shape. It is the shape of the person or thing that used to be there. You have memories. You have a before and an after.
This is different, though. This is feeling like something is missing, but you have zero memory of ever having had it.
It wasn't taken away from you. It was never there to begin with.
It's almost like reaching for a limb you were never born with.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. And Malha argues that these three things, the static silence, the weight without a story, the absence without loss, these aren't failures of introspection. They are direct encounters with the unformed.
Okay, so let's get into the real meat of this, the unformed. Because I need to push back here a little bit just to play devil's advocate.
Please do.
How is unformed not just a fancy philosophical word for repressed? Because if I go to a standard therapist and say, I have this heavy weight but no story to attach to it, they're probably going to say, well, this story is just too painful, so your brain has buried it in the basement.
It is a very fair question.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's the hardest distinction to make when reading this essay. But Molly is incredibly clear on this point. Repression deals entirely with the formed. Things that actually happened. Real events. Trauma. Conversations. These things took a shape. They entered your experience. They were recorded by your brain. And then, because they were too dangerous or painful to hold on to, your psyche shoved them into the basement and locked the door.
Okay. So they exist in the house. They're just out of sight.
Correct. And because they exist inside the house, they can theoretically be retrieved. Through hypnosis, deep therapy, or just time, you can eventually pick the lock. You can find the file.
But the unformed?
The unformed refers to conditions that never took the shape of a thought, a memory, or a sensation. They did not make it into the house. They didn't even make it into the basement.
They are outside.
They're the landscape outside the house.
Yeah.
Molly uses this spatial analogy heavily. We tend to think the answer is hiding behind the curtain of our experience. He is saying, no, these conditions sit completely outside the structure that makes experience possible in the first place.
Wow. So if I'm a radio, the unformed isn't a station I'm just tuning out or getting static on. It's a frequency I literally wasn't built to receive.
That is a perfect analogy. You can turn the volume knob up as high as you want. You can take the entire radio apart and meticulously rewire it. You will never, ever hear that signal because the machinery of you simply isn't designed to process it.
And this is where the ghosts movement comes in, isn't it? Because when I first read the name, I assumed they were literal ghost hunters, but they're almost more like map makers.
Exactly like map makers. Malha founded the ghost movement, essentially, to create a taxonomy of these human blind spots. They use this central text they call the Codex.
Which, by the way, sounds like something straight out of a Dan Brown thriller.
It really does. But in practice, it's quite dry and structural. The Codex isn't a mystical book of answers. It is a rigorous catalog of limits. It lists the conditions that shape us, but simply do not enter our awareness. The Unformed is just one specific entry in this Codex.
So instead of trying to force these weird blank experiences into a narrative story, they just map the boundary. They say, here is where the road ends. Stop driving.
Right. It is a profound shift from saying, I need to fix this, to saying, I need to recognize the actual geometry of my own mind.
But why? Why are there parts of us that are completely off limits? This is the part of the essay that got really dense for me. The separation theory. Can we unpack that without needing a PhD in philosophy?
We can certainly try. It all goes back to the fundamental question of origin. We all have this deep innate desire to know where we came from, to find our source.
The true self, the ultimate origin story.
But Mala's core argument is that existence fundamentally requires separation. Think about a camera for a second. A camera can take a picture of absolutely everything in the room, but it can never take a picture of itself.
Well, unless it looks in a mirror.
Sure, but even then, it is seeing a reflection. It's a second-order image. It cannot see its own lens as it is in the act of seeing. To be the thing that sees, you have to be separate from the thing being seen.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, apply that exact logic to your consciousness. You exist because you separated from the everything. You became a distinct I. The necessary cost of becoming an I is that you permanently lose access to the everything that preceded you.
So the origin isn't a place I can somehow journey back to. It is the very thing I had to leave in order to get here.
Exactly. Malha writes, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, that the conditions that made you possible do not exist inside your current awareness. They are the scaffolding. Once the building is up, the scaffolding is removed. You can tear the entire building apart looking for it, but you won't find it. It is logically impossible.
That is actually mind-blowing. We're out here frantically tearing up the floorboards of our living room, looking for the crane that built the house.
And then we feel immense guilt when we don't find it. We think we're just bad archaeologists. But the unformed is simply the realization that the crane is gone.
So if we accept this, if we accept that I can't know everything about myself, that there are these hard structural blind spots, how is that actually a relief? Because part of me still hears that and feels like, great, so I am just permanently ignorant.
It is a relief because it kills the exhausting project of solving yourself.
Solving myself?
Think about the listener right now who woke up with that heavy weight in their chest this morning. If they follow the standard model, what is their day like?
It's miserable. They are distracted at work. They are constantly scanning their recent memories. They're probably texting their friends, asking for reassurance. They feel fundamentally broken because they can't just snap out of it or figure it out.
They are expending massive amounts of emotional energy trying to force a narrative onto a physical sensation that completely rejects narrative.
They are trying to squeeze a square peg into a round hole and just hurting themselves in the process.
Right. Now imagine they apply Mala's framework instead. They wake up, they feel the weight, they check the mental Rolodex, nothing there.
So they stop.
They stop. They say, okay, this is presence without reference.
They don't try to name it. They don't try to fix it.
They simply acknowledge the boundary. They say, this is an unformed condition. It is here. It is heavy, but it is not a riddle.
It's not a riddle. That is the key right there.
It completely changes your relationship to the pain. It is no longer a flashing warning sign that you're failing at life. It's just weather.
It's just weather. You don't try to psychoanalyze a thunderstorm. You just put on a raincoat and wait for it to pass.
Exactly. The ghosts movement isn't about ignoring these difficult things. It is about discernment. It is about knowing the difference between a repressed memory that actually needs dedicated therapy and an unformed condition that just needs endurance.
Endurance. That is a much less sexy word than healing, isn't it?
It really is. But it is far more honest.
Yeah.
Mala talks a lot about carrying the unformed. You just carry it. You let it sit there in the room with you. You don't demand it tell you its deep, dark secrets because it doesn't have any to give.
You know, this really reminds me of that constant modern pressure to always be growing, to always be optimizing every part of your life. The idea is that if you're not moving forward and uncovering new traumas to heal, you're stagnating. But this suggests that sometimes you just are.
And that we are allowed to be mysteries to ourselves. The cultural demand for total transparency, the idea that I must know absolutely everything about why I feel anything, Mala suggests that is actually a form of violence we inflict on ourselves.
That is a heavy statement. The demand for self-knowledge is violence.
It is an impossible standard.
Right.
And when we hold ourselves to impossible standards, we inevitably create shame. I shouldn't feel this way. I should know why I'm sad. Mala is saying, drop the shame. You are a finite creature. You have limits. Respect the limits.
It's funny, we started this deep dive talking about digging deep to find the core self, and we've ended up essentially saying, stop digging.
Or at least know when you've hit the bottom and it's time to put the shovel down.
Right. There is absolutely still value in knowing yourself, but there is a point where the shovel hits bedrock.
And that bedrock isn't a failure. It is the foundation.
So let's try to bring this home for the listener who is maybe driving to work right now or doing the dishes and feeling that vague, unnameable something.
We have covered a lot of ground today. We looked at the trap of infinite depths, the lie that we can always find the answer if we look hard enough.
We talked about the glitch, the silence that stays completely silent, the heavy weight that has no story.
We distinguished the unformed from the repressed, the difference between the locked basement you can eventually open and the open sky you can't contain.
And we talked about separation theory, why we can't find our own scaffolding.
And finally, the structural shift. The shift from frantically fixing to simply carrying.
I think my biggest personal takeaway from all of this is just permission. Permission to be confused.
Yes.
Permission to feel something heavy and not have a neat little PowerPoint presentation ready to explain it to myself or anyone else.
That is the ultimate goal here. To stand at the edge of your own understanding and not panic.
So, here is a final thought for you to chew on today. We spend our whole lives acting like the curators of a museum. We want every feeling, every memory, every random sensation to have a little brass placard next to it, explaining exactly what it is and where it came from.
We want to be able to give the full guided tour.
But maybe the museum has an edge. Maybe there are wings that were just never built. So next time you feel that weight without a name, or you sit in a silence that leads absolutely nowhere, what if you stopped trying to build a door where there is only a solid wall?
What if you just stood there, right at the boundary, and accepted that this is simply where you end?
And maybe, just maybe, the silence isn't waiting for you to speak, it's just silence.
Just silence.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
See you next time.